I suspect, especially with what's going on this year, I would venture to guess that there are a lot more people who are willing to be active in doing the right thing. And if we're just talking about Julian Assange specifically, to me, it's about as clear cut of a case as somebody being railroaded by a government or governments or institutions who are just trying to shut him up. And I would say, and you please correct me if anything I'm saying is wrong or you think is wrong, but I would venture to guess that probably 70% of people in the United States thinks he's a criminal of some type.
Yeah.
For what he's done.
At least.
Yeah. I mean, it kills me. It's amazing to me how few people get it. I mean, I have people, friends who are journalists, and they don't get it, that they're just as in danger as he is. They seem to think he's not like them somehow. And it's amazed me how hard it is to get traction for this, which seems to me to be so obviously cut and dry. He's being harassed for telling the truth. For embarrassing people, for being a journalist. And it's so hard to get traction. That's what I'm wondering is like, what are we doing wrong that there's no traction?
Well, they have the money and the mainstream media on their side. And you hit on the most important thing that people have to realize is thanks to 9/11 and the Patriot Act, it clearly stipulates that they can black bag anybody, even if you're an American citizen. Each one of us could disappear and never be heard of again. We don't even get a phone call. We wake up, we're in Romania or, in some cell. What happened to Dave? Oh, that Dave. So I think that's why we really need to get involved, because this man's about as brave as you could be. I mean, I'm not sure how many people could withstand the pressure that of what he's been through and survive it.
Right.
And I mean, when you have entire governments coming down on you, I mean, it's obvious that what he has to say is so dangerous to them that they're willing to go to these extremes. And that should wake people up and say, maybe I better listen to this guy. If they're trying to shut him up, I had better, that's important enough that I had better listen.
Yeah. Do you have any information on his status right now? How's his health? How's he doing?
I don't know anything about what he's going through. Paul, you told me he's still in prison, and I have to send that letter to him. I promised you I'd send that letter, and I will.
Yeah, I think he receives them. I really do. I've always felt that way. I've been sending him letters since the time he was in the embassy, and everybody thought I was crazy, but I said, there's a good chance that he'll receive it. So I send him letters. So the case is, he's having a management case hearing tomorrow, Monday, the 27th. And he hasn't been appearing to the last few because he's afraid of contracting the COVID, because the judge refused bail, even though he has a bad lung condition. And the UK said that they were going to release all these non-criminal prisoners, and they didn't. I think they released a handful, and one of them, of course, was not the political prisoner Julian Assange. So he's in prison in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, not receiving visitors, not seeing his legal team. He was given a computer after a year of asking for one. He now has a computer, but the keys are glued down, so he can't type. It took him a year to get a radio. So the only plus that's happened, the only positive thing that's happened is he finally has a radio, because he was just in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. And so I think the thing that's just to catch you up, just the thing that's keeping him hanging on is he had a family at the embassy. So his partner is a lawyer, very smart woman who was brought in to help cover his case back in 2015. Very smart, multilingual young woman, also a lawyer. and they had 2 children in secret at the embassy. So I think that's what's keeping him going, and plus he's super smart. So that when he gets a phone call, he'll call one of his political friends, and instead of like talking about himself, he's asking about the economical stuff that's going on because of COVID. Like he's asking his friends, what's going on economically? And that's the kind of mind he has. He's not, it's so funny, he was labeled a narcissist because he's anything but that. He's always thinking of the outside world and, the mechanisms of what's running the world. It's just, so that's what's keeping him on. A lesser person would have been dead by now. That's my feeling. So, and just one other thing. So management hearing tomorrow, the cruel judge, what is she, a magistrate barrister, she's forcing him to show up. So that means he has to go into an interview room, to go to Skype or whatever, that is not, everybody uses it. So it makes him more susceptible to contract it in this interview room, but he's being forced to attend tomorrow. So, because, so that's as much as I know right now.
Okay. What is the subject of the hearing that he's attending? I mean, what is it addressing?
It's just they have management hearings, like, what are your complaints, defense? And, like the last one they had, they added that new, what's it called? The new charges, and it hadn't even been brought to the courts yet. And they should be called mismanagement, because when they complain about how Belmarsh is treating him, the magistrate says, well, I don't have any authority over that. Well, who does? Nobody does. And then you talk to you write to the director of Belmarsh, and he says, I don't have any authority over that. So nobody's taking,
What is the official charge?
The official charge?
Why actually is he being held in prison? Is it just for extradition or for another country, or did the UK charge him with something?
No, the UK didn't. So originally he was held on bail. He was held because of him skipping bail over that Swedish thing. And then that time got used up. He should have been released from prison, and he wasn't. And then it's just on the grounds of the extradition that he would be a flight case, that they wouldn't trust that, that he's going to fly like and he really didn't leave the first time. He just sought asylum. That's what because he knew he was going to be extradited to the US. So, so that was denied, and he's being held, just like you said, David, solely on the extradition hearing. No charges, just the charges that the US have slammed on him.
Is Australia doing anything now?
No.
You
mean as far as people speaking up? There are, like, there's a set of MPs that have finally, important people that have come forward. But as far as Scott Morrison, the prime minister, he hasn't, they're all washing their hands of it because they're part of that global cabal, just to shut people down who's telling the truth. So no one, there's so many positive things that happened for him, like the UN, and finally Amnesty International came forward. Big, finally, like, the big ones, Doctors Without Borders. What's her name? She's come forward so strong for him. She's like, can't think of her name right now, but a lot of big organizations have now come forward because it's crunch time. They want to be on the right side of history. And finally, there's a motion in the UK, finally a Julian Assange motion in the UK Parliament, but it's been tabled. I don't know what tabled means in that, but they're trying to get MPs from both sides of the two different parties. They have more than two parties, but it's too little too late. It's like people realize that all the damage that's going to be done on free press, and they don't want to be part of that. So they've started this motion. So a lot of people are just going like this to it, like too little too late. So the big extradition hearing is the final one that's going to be 2 or 3 weeks is September, the first week in September 7th. And I'm organizing an action in DC. That's what we're doing.
Okay.
So David, I wanted to ask you, this call to action, and are you thinking like broad? Are you trying to like draw in local activists to make this happen? How do you imagine this call to action?
I think that it has to spread like a wildfire for this man to get released.
Yeah.
Because you've already said these organizations have tried. There has to be so much anger, and I would say this year there's a lot of angry people. There's scared, and then there's angry.
Yeah.
And I think we can try to utilize, or let me rephrase that, we can try to channel this energy into a cause that will get results. But I think most people, the reason, most people default to trusting their government, unfortunately. And so government and mainstream media has, you see these politicians, they're like, if it was up to me, I'd put him up against the wall and I'd shoot him, right? You hear certain politicians saying this. And so people are like, wow, this guy must be really the devil. And so I think maybe what we do is the call to action. I think maybe we have to inform people on really what happened, number one. And number two, try to come together with an action plan as to what we can do to get him released immediately, because the courts aren't going to do it. Courts aren't going to do it. The United States, or whoever is in charge, is controlling every other party. And they've already determined that this guy is either going to die in prison or he's going to Guantanamo or something like that.
Yeah.
Never be heard of again. And and my knowledge of Julian Assange is probably not good enough, because all of us are imperfect people. We all have our flaws, but that's why we have to look at what they're accusing this man of doing and dissecting that. Instead of, we shouldn't even get into the allegations that, supposedly he raped women, right? Because that's how they got him, and that's how they originally tried to get all the members of WikiLeaks, right? Some sort of sexual allegations, correct?
Yeah, so I've been following this very closely for 2 years, part-time job. So what's happening with the Swedish case is it's pretty much, I see lots of articles written about Julian, mainstream media, like globally, and they have finally stopped. There was like this little thing always at the end of the article that mentioned that he was, facing these, he escaped. He's holed himself up in the embassy to avoid these rape charges, which there were never any charges, just never. And finally, the news outlets have dropped that. Finally, they've stopped adding that. So that's been cleaned up a little bit, because the rape.
Well, they don't need it now because he's in custody.
Well, they still want to keep that negative thing because they're afraid that all of us activists are coming forward with. The big thing now is the elephant in the room. You talk about educating people, David. The thing that most people are stressing, the human rights guy, Nils Meltzer, on torture, he's the one. The elephant in the room are the crimes that he exposed. So there's a lot of people doing videos that they're calling teach-ins. So Action for Assange they just released their second teach-in, which is the facts. What has he released? And it's the war crimes. It's the war crimes. And that's what, if we can keep talking about Assange and, that he's not a journalist, that WikiLeaks is not a news outlet, if we can keep that going, calling him a hacker or a rapist, then we're never going to get at the truth, which are the crimes, the government and the global government's crimes, and corporations' crimes too. People know so little about this genius. If you ever watch him talk or listen to him talk, oh my God, he's a global humanitarian, and all the documents out there from WikiLeaks has actually helped thousands of court cases get off because WikiLeaks gets the defense off because it's 100% accurate. So if somebody walks in the court with a WikiLeaks document, they've won their case. That's one reason why they want to silence Assange, is because court cases are being won, like major court cases with oil, the oil in the oceans, and just, the list goes on. So little, we just know him in the DNC leaks, but oh my God, Assange is in Africa. What he's done in Africa in positive, efforts is unbelievable once you dive into what WikiLeaks is really about. So
we know for a fact that corporations control the United States government through the lobbyists and through money, whether it's the drug companies, whether it's the defense contractors, okay, they really control the policies of the United States government. And so we had Colin Powell going in front of the UN saying we have weapons of mass destruction to get us into these endless wars. We had Vietnam started because of a fake incident in the Tonkin Gulf. We have had numerous hoaxes and lies told by politicians to get us into the first Gulf War, when they had the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador in disguise or in basically under a false name come in and testify that Iraqi troops were killing babies in incubators, which led to a war resolution. And so I implore my fellow citizens, please wake up. Please do not blindly believe what the US government is doing, because it's all led by a profit motive. And one of the first things you should really do is educate yourself with Smedley Butler, who wrote a book called War is a Racket. Okay, and I did a brief video on it as well. And Smedley Butler was the most highest decorated Marine for about 100 years until World War II. And what he came to realize was he was being sent to Latin America, to Mexico, all over the Caribbean to kill people for the benefit of these corporations. Somebody wanted 5 cents more an hour for a banana, they sent in the Marines. Mexico wanted their oil, send in the Marines. And that's what our military is still being used for today.
Stop you, because you listed so many great examples. The newest one, as of yesterday, was Elon Musk coming out and saying that the people really shouldn't get a stimulus package because blah, blah. He believes in basic income and that would really help the people, but basic income's not going to help because we have a Congress that's not going to help the people. And then somebody started talking about the coup in Bolivia for the what's it called? The stuff that goes in batteries, lithium, the lithium mines, and how Elon Musk was part of that. And he was part of that coup to get rid of Evo Morales. And then Elon Musk tweeted, so coups happen, like get a grip, deal with it. That was he admitted to being part of that coup. So yeah, it's big companies and governments working together to overthrow, mineral oil rich countries. And that's what we do. And that was the latest one on that list that you just went through. So his name is Smedley.
Smedley, but Smedler, Smedley. I'm sorry, Ley, and then Butler.
Very unfortunate name, but no, I've read his stuff. One thing I'm thinking I'm going to do after this is I'm going to go and interview 5 of my so-called progressive friends who haven't done anything about Assange and find out why. I haven't done that. It's pretty stupid. I mean, I've tried to convince people to do stuff, but I've never really, really looked into why they're not.
You think you know who he is?
And I think that might give me some ideas about what we need to focus on. I mean, a lot of people bought into the fact, this I know not from close friends, but a lot of acquaintances I know bought into the fact that, he's this horrible rapist who didn't take care of his cat in the embassy. I mean, the press was really good at smearing him, really, really good at smearing him. But I've got plenty of friends who are not low information. They should goddamn well be able to see past that. And I am going this week to find, especially I have two that are journalists, and I'm going to find out this week what their problem is. And that will help me know how to go forward. I mean, what exactly it is we have to attack. Part of it is just that the press has been so successful in smearing him personally. Rapist who doesn't take care of his cat.
So after following this for so long, it really comes down to, that's really a good suggestion, Mary, to really, instead of forcing information on people, try to understand why they're not absorbing the good information and they're buying all the government lies. And that's a good thing to do, really, because, why aren't they? Because when you ask yourself, would 5 governments persecute a rapist? That's all so would they go to this extent? And this financial investment and such 10 years of destroying his character, would they do it for somebody that was insignificant? No, they do it because he had a huge following and he's a brilliant man. They take our brilliant people and they silence them. So I think I'll do the same, but this was an example. We have our activist friends from the Green Party. This is where I know Mary from. I think we date back to the Green Party, right, Mary? We were burners turned.
Jill Stein.
Jill Stein, that's where we all connected. Well, I met some really fine people, but they didn't really, I don't know if the call for action scared them a little bit, but because when you say action, maybe people don't want to step up and do something because it's work. It's just work. And they probably feel like they're exhausted just looking at the Portland video with moms being beat up by the stormtroopers. I don't know what the deal is, but it is exhausting. That's why I've chosen one thing. You notice, Mary, I didn't get involved in the politics. I wasn't supporting Bernie, really. I supported him a little bit, but I knew I was hurt from 2016 all the time I invested in that. So my one thing is Julian Assange now, because, nobody's supporting him. And he's the goal. He's the most important goal, because politics and, our electoral system doesn't really matter if we're not getting the truth. And that's what they just want to shut up the truth tellers. But so I definitely can do that too, Mary. I can, ask people.
Yeah.
So David, how do we set people's hair on fire?
Yeah.
I think this is, I think this is exactly, when you, I think you both just touched on it. You are not going to convince anybody of anything. They have to convince themselves, right? And by knowing what the objections are and explaining to them that the real information is here, and this is why it's important to get motivated and involved. I think that's where we have to start. And it's going to become a snowball effect. It's just baby steps. So it's kind of like, for example, it's like everything in life is a priority that we spend our time on. We can't put our time and energy into everything. And a lot of people are not going to get involved in something that they think has no chance of being successful with, right? So
that's it.
So this definitely has, because it's so obviously clear that Julian Assange is being wronged. I think when enough people finally wake up to that and say, this is not acceptable, then I think that's when we will start to get some movement. But it's not going to take one video.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we need to educate ourselves as well. We have to acknowledge that there are facts and maybe information that we're not aware of. And by asking these people, you're going to find out a couple things. Are they ignorant to who he is and what he's done and what he stands for? Or do they possibly have information that we could use to tailor our approach to involve more people? Because that's the whole thing. Anytime you're in business as well, if I'm selling a product or I'm selling a service, I encourage discussion. I want to talk about why you don't want to use my product or my service, or what your objections are, because then I can take them down. If you refuse to talk to me or engage with me, then the worst thing you can do is sit there, well, my product's the best because I can do this, when the person you're talking to might not care anything about what you're saying. It's critical that you find out what your target market wants or what they believe, and then you can tailor your message. And I think over time, that's what we can do, is we can create these tailored messages so that whether it's a product or a service or caring about why we should take action with Julian Assange, there are reasons, and we just have to pinpoint the most important reasons to start with and then tailor the message each time.
What I'm thinking if I presented this to people I'm going to tell you about a generic situation. On one side of it is information from our favorite US government. On the other side, we have Amnesty International, the UN Rapporteur for Torture, blah, 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 blah. Okay, who do you think you would believe? And most of my progressive friends would go for Amnesty International, the UN Rapporteur on Torture, and I'll say, okay, this is the case. But I think that's just another idea. But first, I'm going to go out and find out what the problem is. But I do think that people have gotten so used to the personalities of it, they don't realize the various sources of the information. And if they weighed them, any progressive would weigh US government versus Amnesty International, the UN Special Rapporteur for Torture, blah, blah, blah. You'd say I'd go for that side, not the US government. I mean, who trusts US government? When have they ever told us the truth in a war? Never. So.
Did you mention United Nations too?
Yeah, I mean, UN Rapporteur for Torture, yeah.
But actually the UN came out. Yeah. Yeah, the UN came out years ago saying he was arbitrarily held and he needed to be released and compensated.
Mm-hmm.
But so I can share a couple of the recent teach-ins. They're just short videos, which I think are helpful along the lines of what you were talking about, David.
And those are YouTube videos?
They are. They just came out with one.
When I create this video, then I'll include those links.
Good idea. And also, I'm wondering if you're so impressed with the Smedley Butler, you did a video on the war is a racket. I wonder, because, so my big things were like anti-war. And Julian Assange covered that for me, because I believe that information, if we all had the information, there wouldn't be any war. And so if you could take the war as a racket, which is all about Assange, because look, they have the guy that would be exposing all this in a solitary confinement while we're trying to wage war on Iran and we're going into Syria and like they're getting away with all this regime change.
Well, they always need a boogeyman.
They need, yeah. So I wondered if you could take your War as a Racket video, and I would like to see that, so if you could send me the link to that too.
Okay, I
wonder if you could tailor that to the Assange thing, taking clips from it or something.
I will try.
Because God, it's so true, Mary. All the people we're friends with are people that would totally side with Amnesty, the way Amnesty thinks, although Amnesty and some of those human rights NGOs have been co-opted because of money, because the government funds them. Of course, they're not as strong on human rights as they used to be, but it would be really good to point that out. Like, really, would we believe a secretive big government, or would we believe human rights? And And that's a good question. That's a good question to ask. Because I have to say, I've been trying to work on my stepson, who's 40-ish, really smart, lawyer in the middle of raising a family. And I keep coming back to him. So do you finally know about Julian Assange? Because he thinks I'm this nutcase activist, you know, stepmother. And he says, yeah, I really can't take anyone seriously that has associations with Roger Stone. This is after I sent him links this is what mainstream media has done. They ran with it. The Manafort visiting Assange at the embassy, The Guardian ran with that. They never took that article down, even though it was debunked, because they wanted to tie Assange to the whole Russiagate thing. And none of that was proven, but they won't take it down. They won't retract it. And so that whole Roger Stone thing and the Mueller report thing sticks in their head that Assange still was tied to that quagmire. It's so frustrating. And he's a smart guy, but he doesn't have the time to invest, and he doesn't care. And people aren't going to care until we don't have it anymore. You know, it's like.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I just got a message that they're going to shut off the video in a minute.
Okay. Well, it's good to see you. It was great to see you, Paula. And it was nice to meet you, Seth Thomas. Dave.
You too,
Yes.
man.
So
usually they don't cut us off. That we can just talk until they cut us off. I think
they can.
do,
Okay.
They'll take us down probably at an hour. But I just want to say, as only with the three of us, I feel sort of inspired by it, because it's kind of lonely to, you know, I use my Facebook just mostly for Assange, and there's very little people interaction, and it's a little frustrating, but you know, we keep on keeping on. And I have to say, David, that I don't know that our action in Concord, if we Googled it, I bet it would come up. If you put like Concord, New Hampshire, Julian Assange, there might be photos that come up because of all the sharing that we did on Twitter and Facebook. So
Okay.
I think every little bit, even though it's not formalized, you know, I agree, every little bit is just more. When people Google something, it's going to be our little call to action on top of the little actions that I've done.
Yes.
So, you know, it's inspiring, even with the three of us. And here Mary is in Ukraine,
Right.
like, you know, spending part of her time to just touch base, because it can feel hopeless. Like when you started talking about this call to action, we've got to get 100,000 people in the streets, you know, hundreds of thousands of people. And
wanted a friggin' war, that's why. That's not popular.
It's
And they
very,
got it.
listen, it's
And
very
they got
simple.
it.
Actually, in Smedley, Butler addresses this. He very clearly says it in his book, okay? He says basically, up to the war of 1898, America didn't have foreign holdings. Now we have, how many, 200 bases around the world, millions of guys spread out?
We're all over the place. Yeah.
This guy, 80 years ago, was saying, his words almost exactly, if I remember correctly, said, nobody has heeded our founding father and our first president.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. One of the problems, not specifically on this issue, just in general, let's put it this way: money trumps peace sometimes. In other words, commercial interests are very powerful interests throughout the world.
One of the U.S. Marine Corps' most highly decorated generals, Smedley Darlington Butler, by his own account, helped pacify Mexico for American oil companies, Haiti and Cuba for National City Bank, Nicaragua for the Brown Brothers Brokerage, the Dominican Republic for sugar interests, Honduras for U.S. food companies, and China for Standard Oil.
Food and fuel were choked off. Water for hundreds of thousands of people was shut off. Cities and towns were shelled, mosques were destroyed, and apartment buildings reduced to rubble.
Humanitarian baloney has nothing to do with it. It has to do with oil. It has to do with power and greed. And it has to do with psychopaths as presidents.
Other civilians. Oops, we killed them. So are you really good at killing people? Maybe you think, yeah, I am. I kill these people all the time. I don't give a damn if they're civilians or not, but I'm good at killing. Well, that is not a pretty thing to brag about.
We came, we saw, he died. It was not in our national interest to let this happen. Since when was it? What's not our national interest to be there? Where are the prostitutes? Who are you in bed with? How come you're not talking about this? How come no one's bringing it up now? It's not our national interest, never was. 30,000 dead. A country destroyed. Why talk about it? Why get upset? It's only another day of murder in Murder Inc. Oh yeah, invading a sovereign nation. That's keeping this country safe. It works all the time. You invade other countries, you destabilize them, the place is turned into chaos, and there are people that want to get even with you. It's commander-in-chief, and people get away with this stuff.
General Butler's services were also in demand in the United States itself in the 1930s, as President Franklin Delano Roosevelt sought to relieve the misery of the Depression through public enterprise and tougher regulations on corporate exploitation and misdeeds. Large parts of the corporate elite despised what Roosevelt's New Deal stood for. And so, in 1934, a group of conspirators sought to involve General Butler in a treasonous plan.
The plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans, to use as a bluff or as a club at least, to intimidate the government.
But the corporate cabal had picked the wrong man. Butler was fed up with being what he called a gangster for capitalism.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities, which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government.
A congressional committee ultimately found evidence of a plot to overthrow Roosevelt. According to Butler, the conspiracy included representatives of some of America's top corporations, including J.P. Morgan, DuPont, and Goodyear Tire.
The drastic bombing of London by Nazi Germany, for example, was made possible by a $20 million sale of fuel to IG Farben by the Rockefellers Standard Oil Company. This is just one small point on the topic of how American businesses funded both sides of World War II. One other treasonous organization worth mentioning is the Union Banking Corporation of New York City. Not only did they finance numerous aspects of Hitler's rise to power, along with actual materials during the war, it was also a Nazi money laundering bank, which was eventually exposed for having millions of dollars of Nazi money in its vaults. The Union Banking Corporation of New York was eventually seized for violations of the Trading with the Enemy Act. Guess who the director and vice president of the Union Bank was? Prescott Bush, the father and grandfather of former U.S. Presidents George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush.
Very few Americans knew what Kuwait was when the invasion took place, and the odds are they didn't care much that Iraq had invaded Kuwait. They probably couldn't even find it on a map, for the most part. Americans are famously ignorant of geography. So this war very much had to be sold to the American people in order to convince them to intervene militarily.
Final witness is also using an assumed name, and again we ask our friends in the media to respect the need for her to protect her family, and we finally call on Naira to testify.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Naira, and I just came out of Kuwait. My mother and I were in Kuwait on August 2nd for a peaceful summer holiday. My older sister had a baby on July 29th, and we wanted to spend some time in Kuwait with her. I only pray that none of my 10th grade classmates had a summer vacation like I did. The Iraqis were making fun of President Bush and verbally and physically abusing my family and me on our way out of Kuwait.
Telling you that we have never heard, in all this time, in all circumstances, a record of inhumanity and brutality and sadism as the ones that the witnesses have given us today. I don't know how the people of the civilized countries of this world can fail to do everything within their power to remove this scourge from the face of our earth.
She seemed to be alone before the Congressional Human Rights Caucus identified only as a Kuwaiti escapee. But we've discovered she wasn't alone at all. And she wasn't just a simple Kuwaiti escapee. In fact, just a few seats away was her father, Kuwait's ambassador to the United States and Canada. Naira quickly slipped out of the caucus hearing, back into the protective folds of her family, the extended royal family of Kuwait, headed by the Emir Jabir al-Sabah. I have to ask why she was not identified as your daughter when she gave that testimony to the House Committee, or the House Caucus.
Well, for security reasons, I didn't believe it was just for her safety.
Did the Human Rights Caucus members and the chair people know who she was?
Yes, of course
they knew her identity.
They knew her identity, and they knew exactly what the girl was telling them was the truth.
How many people knew that she was the ambassador's daughter?
I didn't. I don't know who knew. I did not know she was the ambassador's daughter.
When did you find out she was the ambassador's daughter?
This is the first allegation I've had that she was the ambassador's daughter.
Does it affect her credibility in your mind?
I think it certainly should have been known at the time of the hearing. It would have had bearing on what she might have said, yes. I think people, members of Congress certainly, and members of the public were entitled to know the source of her testimony, therefore who she was.
The president repeated the incubator story 6 times in his verbal war against Saddam.
And they had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
Daylight brings only the digging of yet more graves as bodies...
Soon there were reports of mass burials of premature babies in Kuwait, dumped from incubators which were then trucked to Baghdad.
The Iraqis tore the respirators from their incubators.
We had to bury many of people.
And the story didn't just have an impact in the U.S. The United Nations convened a rare public forum.
Time to check the aggression of this ruthless dictator whose troops have bayoneted pregnant women and have ripped babies from their incubators in Kuwait.
The House easily approved a war resolution. Then it was up to the Senate.
To authorize the use of United States armed forces pursuant to United
States. In the debate, the incubator story came up 7 times.
Mr. Dole, aye. Mr. Domenici, aye.
In the end, the war resolution only passed by 5 votes. The U.S. decision to wage war against Iraq was supported by an overwhelming civilian consensus. The heart of that consensus was the belief that Saddam Hussein was evil incarnate.